Well, here we are, 8:30 in the morning. Jeff's little engine service is at it again. Today we're going to fix a Honda carburetor, a horizontal Honda engine carburetor. So this is the Honda engine we're going to fix today. It's on a pressure washer. Here are the tools I will use for this. 10mm socket, long skinny flathead screwdriver, 10mm box end wrench, needle nose pliers, preferably with a bend on the end, and a variety of brushes, Q-tips, and cleaning tools. So all you need to remove this carburetor is basically the needle nose pliers and the 10mm socket. You've got two 10mm nuts here, this one and this one, that hold on the air filter assembly and the carburetor assembly. So as I said, we have two 10mm nuts that remove the air filter cover and the whole carburetor. A couple of things you'll have to worry about at this point once you get this all off is it's a good idea to remove the fuel line now, and I'll show you how to remove the linkages. So the fuel lines, we usually have a clamp, which these pliers right here, I tell you, they work great for a lot of different uses. Alright, so we have the clamp off. I also use these to remove the fuel line just by kind of prying it off. So do you see the fuel line hiding back here? A lot of times they're hard to get off, but I'll just use a pair of pliers and kind of pry them off. Sometimes it's a good idea to twist it a few times, see if you can break it loose that way. This one does not want to budge for sure. Alright, so I'm finally got this fuel line to break loose a little bit. I'll use pliers and just kind of use them as a lever. Be careful not to break anything, and then just lift it up. If you're working on small engines, you got to get yourself one of these. You use this on the fuel line to pinch it, to pinch off the flow of fuel. Okay, so I finally got this fuel line worked loose and clamped off the line so we don't have gas flowing everywhere. And there we go. Now we got to worry about the linkages and getting those off. Basically at this point, if you can get everything out of your way, it's much easier. You want to pull the carburetor, and you can see on this one, if you rotate, let me zoom in here, see if we can get this. Alright, so what you're going to have to do is you pull the carburetor out and you rotate this, and you can see how that slot on top of that black mechanism lines up with the linkage. That's what you want to do. You want to line that up, and then it just pulls right out. See how easy that was? We also have a spring that we want to disconnect here. Remember where everything goes. There we go. Alright, this thing should just slide right off now. Once again, keep everything in position so you don't forget what was where. There we go. Now we'll take a look at the inside of this Honda carburetor and see what we have going on here. Small Honda lawnmower engine, the 10mm wrench is your friend. Let's take off the float bowl here, see what we have. You can already see a bunch of stuff falling out of it. Yeah. So, take a look at that. Yeah. It's not the best carburetor situation, but hopefully we can rebuild it. and there's definitely, you can tell it's rusting, so that there was water in the system. This carburetor is really bad. I hope we can rebuild it. Let's go ahead and take this carburetor apart and get it ready for a good thorough cleaning. Pull the hinge pin here for the float. It's kind of rusted in place, so it's a little stiff, but I think we can get it. There it is. And the float should just pull right off with the float needle, which the float needle is actually not in too bad a condition. I don't know, man. This carburetor may not be cleanable. It's just too damaged. But I'm going to try. Now you can see here, as with most Honda carburetors, the fuel valve is real near the carburetor. The fuel on-off valve, that is. On the bottom of most fuel on-off valves is another separate little float bowl and screen, which you definitely need to clean that every so often as well. And just like the carburetor float bowl, you use a 10 millimeter, and this little float bowl comes right off too. Let's see what we have in there. Well, we actually have clean gas. That's the first good sign that I've seen. You can see a little bit of that brown stuff in the very, very bottom. That's water. So taking this apart, the main jet is way down in this little hole right here. I don't know if you can see, but there's like a layer of rust coating that main jet in there. You got to have a pretty skinny, pretty narrow flathead screwdriver to get down in there and take that jet out. I'm going to get a brass brush and clean off as much of this surface rust that I can see as I can. A brass brush is probably the best. It is the best type of brush to use for an aluminum carburetor body. It won't damage the aluminum, but the bristles are coarse enough to scrape off the rust. So I've just been kind of rubbing my finger around the inside of this carburetor bowl, using the rust as kind of an abrasive to clean off the rest of the surface. So I've decided that this float bowl definitely needs replacing. You can get the parts from Honda, and they're usually fairly inexpensive. Sometimes you can buy a whole carburetor from Honda for less than 30 bucks. But I don't feel like waiting for any parts, so I'm going to just clean it up the best I can and put it back together and see how it works. I can always replace the float bowl at a later time. All I need is a 10 millimeter wrench to do that. So I decided I'm using a steel brush for this bad boy. Got a lot of rust pitting and crud to get off of there. So making progress on this float bowl. I think it'll be usable still. So yeah, there's still a lot of pitting in there, but I think I've removed all the loose stuff, and I think we can run this at least until we get a new float bowl. Now on to the carburetor body. Couldn't find my brass brush, so don't tell anybody that I'm going to use my steel brush for the carburetor body. I'm just going to be real careful. Make sure to get in all the nooks and crannies. You've heard me say it before, whenever you're working with carburetors, the idea is to get everything inside the carburetor as clean as possible. You know, one speck the size of a speck of salt or sand can get lodged in your main jet or your pilot jet and prevent your engine from running. I had to move to a smaller brush to get into some of the tight nooks and crannies. Use a little bit of carburetor cleaner in here to help out. And keep scrubbing. So you have to be really careful getting that main jet out. This is the screwdriver I use to do it. Yeah, all I can say is just hope for the best. Sometimes spray some rust lubricant down in there and that may help. But you're dealing with a brass jet that's screwed into an aluminum carburetor body. So just be careful. Let's see here how we do. Okay, let's hope for the best. Oh, I think that broke loose. I hope. Yes. Going to be able to get that thing out of there. Now getting it out is kind of a trick sometimes because it only unscrews to about there. And to get it out from there, you basically just have to kind of tap on it. Oh, boy, we got lucky that time. There it is. That tiny little jet right there. And if you can see that little hole, if that thing's plugged, your mower is not going to run, or your pressure washer, or whatever you're powering. So once again, this is the main jet. And if you look very closely, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but you can see that the hole is completely plugged by rust. Now the more I cleaned out this carburetor and looked into it, the more I realized that it's not in that bad a shape. It looked pretty gross, but like I say, with a little bit of elbow grease and some determination, you can clean it out. The biggest problem is that float bowl, which I'm hoping I'll be able to replace for maybe $5–10 at the most. Real quick fix. But we're going to go ahead and run it. I also cleaned out the fuel valve reservoir area, as I mentioned. Carburetor's looking pretty clean, looking good. I'm going to tell you guys a secret of Jeff's little engine service. Wire. Copper wire is what I usually use to clean out jets. It's softer than brass, and it will not scratch the brass, but is often stiff enough to be able to poke down in the holes and clear out the jets, just like this one. Got that jet cleared out now. We want everything as clean as possible, so I'm going to double up some of these wires and triple them up and just clean out not just the plugged hole, but you know, everything in this little jet. A lot of rust down in there on this side too. So basically I'm cleaning around the hole. I want to make sure none of that stuff breaks loose and ends up plugging up. Look at that jet sparkle. Look at that. Now that's clean, man. So we've already pulled out the jet and cleaned it. There's also the pickup tube that's down in there, which needs to come out and be cleaned as well. Luckily that one came right out. A lot of times you got to come in from above through the carburetor throat and push it down through. But that's what that looks like. A lot of little tiny holes that need to be cleaned out, and you can see this thing definitely needs to be cleaned up. Regular toothbrush seems to work pretty good on the brass with a little bit of carburetor cleaner. Yeah, that's improving. And some of these holes are so small, you really need just one strand of copper wire is what I'm using to get into that hole there. And I'm going to do that all the way around in every hole here. Make sure to clean out the jet hole here. Good old trusty Q-tips are good for that. And compressed air, which I will also blow all of this stuff out, all these parts out with compressed air. Every little orifice and crack, nook and cranny. This is a good brush to own too. It's about the only thing that'll get down in there. Now you gotta do whatever you gotta do, man, to get all the corrosion and sediment out from all these little tiny cracks. I found this screwdriver is working out pretty good to get down into some of the areas that I can't reach with any of the brushes I have. Take the time to clean it out thoroughly. So what a difference. I'm fairly happy with the way this carburetor turned out cleanliness wise. So we're going to go ahead and reassemble it and run it. So normally you'd just want to replace this float valve on here, this little needle shaped thing, but we're going to try running this with this used one. Just reassemble this carburetor, clean things up as best we can, and see if it'll hold fuel. Do not over tighten down this brass main jet. It's very easy just to break it off in there if you're not careful. You just want to snug it down. There we go. Okay, so let's get this carburetor back together. Everything, every nook, cranny, hole, and component of this carburetor is cleaned out to the best of my ability. It turned out pretty well. The float bowl I'll probably end up replacing, as I mentioned, but I think it'll work for now. So everything is as clean as I can get it. Let's put it back together. Simple as that. Tighten that up with the wrench and you're ready to go back on the machine. So if we don't thoroughly drain the gas from the fuel tank and completely clean and dry out the fuel tank, we're likely to have to fix the same problem again in the future. So anytime you clean out your carburetor, rebuild your carburetor, you definitely need to clean your fuel system, your fuel tank, your fuel lines, fuel valves, that sort of thing. Alright, I'm going to show you how to put this carburetor back on. Okay, remember we got to put this linkage and spring back on. And the carburetor goes on this way. And once you get it pretty much lined up with the linkage, you can, just like we took it off, rotate this over so the slot is that way and it falls right into place. I use these pliers here to get the spring back in the little hole. We're back together. So all I need to do is put the fuel line back on, reattach the crankcase breather tube to where it connects here, put this back on. We got the two nuts and we're going to be ready to fire this baby up. Don't forget this. Put the fuel line back on. and the clamp. Clamp on, push everything in place, make sure everything works. Looks like we're good. Reinstall the breather line, breather hose. Actually, it looks like that breather hose may need to be the last thing that gets put on. Make sure everything lines up and goes back on straight. Now you want them snug, but not too snug. There you go. Put this on and we're going to be ready to fire this baby up. Okay, here it goes. Make sure the fuel valve is on. It is. Okay, watch for leaks. See if that float valve that we used is holding up. It takes a little while for the carburetor to fill up. And I know that this pressure washer, I know the water pump is toast. So I'm not going to worry about hooking a water source to it. Pressure washers, you never want to start them unless you do have a water source to the water pump first. I guess you can burn out the pump. But this one's already toast, so I'm just going to go ahead and use this engine for a go-kart or small mini bike or whatever. Alright, so somewhere on here is a choke. There we go, choke on. Let's see what happens. Turn off the choke. Turn the choke back on. Let's see what's going on here. Now don't you forget who taught you this.